From 2 Keto LLC, it's Keto Woman Podcast with Daisy Brackenhall.
Hello, Keto Lovelies. I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. Keto has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman Podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs to 20 grams or less per day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds and the incidental carbs you find in things like dairy. Moderate protein, scaled to your lean body mass, and then fat to satiety. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you, make your own personalized keto. I'll be asking my guest each week what their keto looks like to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we can't give you medical advice. It's always best to work with your own doctor because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. Before I introduce this week's extraordinary woman, I have an update from Carolina Cartier, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago. At 38 weeks and 4 days on November the 26th, Carolina gave birth to her two wonderful boys. Atlas Michael weighed in at 5 pounds 12 ounces, and his brother Archer Earhart at 6 pounds 12 ounces. Many congratulations, Carolina. This week's extraordinary woman is Kim Howerton. Kim struggled with her relationship with food from the time she was 8. As the years went by and her health problems mounted, she felt at the mercy of her body and out of control with her weight. A dedicated seeker of pleasure, she realized that life in a body that was always in pain was no way to live. That a pleasurable life starts by living in a body that feels good. Enter keto, a life that has brought together her love of satisfying, delicious foods in a way that makes her actually feel good. She now shares her love of all things keto through group coaching, as well as running a very large Facebook group about keto called Completely Keto. Welcome, Kim, to the Keto Women Podcast. It's great to have you here today. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks.
So why don't you tell the listeners a bit about yourself?
My name is Kim Howerton. I live in California. I have been keto for about 18 months. Before that, I had a long stint of low carb, as I call it, low carb white knuckling, before I really found keto, and immediately it appealed to me so much. I'll obviously be happy to talk about anything about it, but, I had pretty much a lifelong food addiction, that began probably when I was around 8 was when it got really serious, and had never been able to turn the part of my brain off that felt, like food was both my greatest love and my greatest enemy. It was sort of a really intense relationship, and I would deem it as an abusive relationship that food and I had together. And keto is sort of the first time that I feel naturally good about food and the way that I interact with it.
It's a nice feeling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just having all that other stuff going away and just for it to be easy for the first time ever, really.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you get your brain back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you say it started when you were 8 years old. How did that manifest? What kind of issues were you having?
Well, I was a really tall kid. It's funny because I'll often in my story be like, I have always been heavy. But, I wasn't a heavy kid. I was a big kid, but not like I wasn't out of range of weight until I was hitting puberty. But because I was a big kid and I looked 2 or 3 years older than I actually was. I also got into that place where puberty sort of started early, hormones hit early. I have to think that there's some serious interaction between my food issues and hormonal issues, because nothing is ever one thing. It's always complicated. I think a combination of things happened. One, I think I grew up in the 80s when dieting was huge. I mean, not that it has gone away, but, there was this definite culture around dieting that probably always existed. But this is my story, not somebody else's story. So for me, it happened in the 80s.
It took off big time in the 80s, didn't it? It really became a thing.
A thing, jazzercise, sweating to the oldies, all, like burning off the pounds.
No pain, no gain.
Yeah, exactly. And I come from a family of people that were all heavy preteens. My mom, my dad, my brother, but all of them are thin adults. But there was all this sort of like weight stress. And I think I saw it coming and was afraid, and saw my brother on diets, and it made me anxious. And, so there was already some anxiety about what was potentially coming my way. And then, when I started around 8 or 9, I started to have depression issues. They hit hardcore when I was 9, but they said started a little before then, but like really bad depression at that point. And I used food to self-soothe. I was just in a pit of despair, to borrow a phrase. But, it was just a really hard time for me as a kid. And I didn't really have a lot of coping skills yet, being 9, to deal with feeling so sad all the time. And I felt a little better when I ate. And so I ate. And I think for a lot of us, it's not that eating is the worst thing we could have done to try and make ourselves feel better. The problem is then it itself becomes another thing that makes us feel bad. Just as with any addiction, the reason you might start is not necessarily the reason that you need to stop, right? A lot of these strategies are effective until they aren't. And I think at that point, I was looking for just not to feel so awful.
That's incredible, though, to have those kind of emotions ruling you at that age. I mean, it's not common to hear of children that age having depression.
Yeah, and I wasn't medicated. It was, I think because, it was at an age when, that is pretty rare. And there is a lot of depression in my family and my extended family. So I don't know that anyone was incredibly confused or shocked, but at the same time, I was very advanced. I've always been advanced. I'm ahead of my time in both good and bad. And so by the time I sort of rounded out my 9th year, I would say I was very overweight by that point. And sort of from then forward, I never saw thin again. I did have a few times when I dieted, did systems, did things and would lose weight, but I would never really, I never got, all the way to where I wanted to be, and I never stayed there long. And so over the course of the decades, every year I tended to weigh more than the year before.
It's the best way to put on weight, really, isn't it? To do diet after diet, because every time you regain a bit more.
Yeah.
And you started. So when did you start your first diet, and what was it? I think there's a special place, isn't there, for that first one? Mine was Herbalife, round about age 15, I think.
Okay. So the first official diet I can recommend, other than sort of, being like, don't eat that, was when I was still in elementary school. So I was probably 12. I joined something called Shapedown, which was a program for teenagers that was run by, it was like you went to the local hospital. It was like some intervention program. And, they taught us about proper nutrition, and it'd make us go walk around the block. And so it was very much based in eat less, exercise more, eat low fat. They tried to sort of educate us about the right things to eat. And, and I know my brother had gone to weight loss camps. I never went to a camp, but because I probably refused, but I went to this after school program. I didn't lose any weight in that, but I did learn that I don't have a lot of hip flexibility in the toe touch experiments we would do. And then, cause they do that thing where they put out like a rule, like a yardstick, and you'd have to like try to touch your toe. Anyway, a lot of the things they did in there, I'm in hindsight very confused about, but then I started on the Weight Watchers thing.
Oh,
so pretty much from like 13, 14 through high school was Weight Watchers on and off. My only success at Weight Watchers, honestly, was when I also had mono. And I slept like 23 hours a day. I lost like 10 pounds. I can't really attribute it to the Weight Watchers experience, but that weigh-in was fabulous when I went back after that. And then I went to college. And, at this point, I'm still shopping in regular stores. I'm not yet a plus size, but I'm right teetering on the border. I'm also tall, so that border was faster. But, I can still go to the Gap, but I'm in their largest size. Not everything fits, which really matters when you're 18 years old.
Of course it does.
Where can you shop? But I was, a little overweight. But I felt like a monster, right? And this is, in hindsight, how many of us wish that we were the weight we were when we first thought we were fat, right?
Yeah, and when we weren't fat. Yeah.
Exactly.
When we look back, hindsight.
I was like, that I looked great. And so, but then, in college, I decided to get serious, and I joined a program they had I was at Santa Cruz, and they had a program where you went into the diet center every day. You had to go in every day, talk to somebody. So it was a lot of counseling. And I actually had some serious success because really I was there every day. And, but then I gained that all back. And by the time I graduated from college was, a good deal over 200 pounds. And from that point until I found keto, I was over 200 pounds my entire adult life.
Right. And you said before that you played around with low carb for a while. Did you have some success with that first?
Yeah. So, about 5 years ago, I believe, it all blurs a little bit, but about 5 years ago, I reached what I would say was a point of like desperation. I had plantar fasciitis in both feet. I was hobbling around. I was so far over 200, I was approaching 300 pounds. I wasn't there yet, but I saw the writing on the wall, that the direction was not going in the right, way. And a friend of mine was doing a program that it was not sold as low carb. It was actually, it was part of a strange sect of OA, Overeaters Anonymous. It was actually a program that Overeaters Anonymous wish didn't exist anymore, like the like upper level, but it was a program that was highly restrictive. You had a sponsor. You ate 3 times a day, whether you were hungry or not. You ate no more than 3 times a day, whether you were hungry or not. You ate a very prescribed amount of things for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you couldn't eat anything that wasn't on the list. There was a list of foods. If it wasn't on the list, you couldn't have it. And if you asked why too many times, you were clearly a troublemaker. And I am a troublemaker. I was like, I don't understand why I can have a peach, but I can't have a nectarine. Could someone explain it to me? And if somebody could have explained it to me, I would have been like, okay, that makes sense. But no, it's not on the list. So, but I did. I lost a good 50 pounds, 60 pounds doing that. And then, but it was like white knuckling it all the way. And because it was this program where you had a sponsor, you had to call in your food every day. If you dropped a piece of cucumber, you had to call them and explain that you dropped a piece of cucumber. So you were short a piece of cucumber. And it became this like incredibly fraught, emotional, codependent thing. And it just it felt incredibly punitive, because if you made a mistake, if you used a spice that you weren't supposed to use accidentally, you had to start your day count again. What is your day count? And it was like, I have been abstinent for 3 days. I have been abstinent for 10 days, and like, you couldn't have a cup of coffee in the afternoon with some cream in it. You know what I mean? Like, you couldn't have cream at all. And anyway, I did it for a long time, and I'm sort of shocked. And I did lose weight, and I was happy with the weight loss, and it did get me started. And during this diet, I read Good Calories, Bad Calories. And so I understood the basics of it. And this plan that I was on was no sugar, no grains, no refined carbohydrates, no super starchy carbs. We could have more carbs than keto. I had fruit. I had beets, some things, like I would say it was more around 100 grams of carbs a day that I was eating, but it definitely fell into that low carb camp. And so I just couldn't do it at a certain point anymore. I felt like I wanted to enjoy my life. I'm a total hedonist. I enjoy all those pleasurable things. And it just made no sense to me that I was eating in a way that made me feel like a crazy person when I wanted to feel like a sane person around food. No, I have plenty of things I feel like a crazy person about all the time. So the food, I needed to feel good because I was a self-described hedonist, especially around food. I'm a foodie. I love food. And I said, like, I can't live the rest of my life like a foodie trapped in a punitive meal plan program. And so I just stopped, and I started eating all the stuff that I don't deal well with. It was lovely for a while. And then I gained all the weight back pretty much. I mean, I was like a little shy, but like pretty much.
Yeah.
I was up there. It's coming up on my boyfriend's birthday 2 years ago. And I said, okay, 40 was on the threshold. Up until that point, all my weight loss stuff was really around looking good. And suddenly I was like, I'm going to die. I'm going to die sooner than I want to die. Like, I wasn't going to die tomorrow, probably. And the years I have left are not going to be as good if I can't walk a block, if I can't go to an event because there's no parking close by. If, my body was a burden. And I was like, wait, if I'm a hedonist, I love pleasure. Like, can you truly experience pleasure in a body that doesn't feel good?
I was going to say, there's a real mismatch there, isn't it? You're not going to be able to pursue your life in the hedonistic way that you want to. You're going to have to do something about it.
Right. And that's when I realized I was lying to myself. I was calling it I'm a pleasure seeker. I like so proud of myself, when in fact I was a reality denier. I was using food not to make me feel better, but to mask how bad I felt. Because while I was eating, and this is the story of every food addict, while I was eating, I could temporarily forget how bad I felt. And I was using food. I wasn't in a good relationship with food. And so I said, I got to turn this around. And I listened to a lot of podcasts, and this is probably the longest intro you've ever had. I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I listened to one with Peter Attia on Tim Ferriss's podcast. And Peter Attia at that time, he's shifted it up a little bit, but at that time he was keto. And he talked about his life experience and what he, how he came to keto. And I was like, okay, I already get I get the issue with carbs. Like I had learned what the problem was carbs, but I was like, but what do I do? I don't know what to do. But I was like, oh, well, that sounds good. And then I listened to another podcast with Dom D'Agostino, and I was like, well, okay, they sound great. These guys seem great. Very smart. Okay, let's do it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go keto. And I just jumped in, except I'd listened to two very athletic men talking about keto.
Not quite the same.
And I was like, why is this not working? I don't understand. So the first 2 weeks were a little bit wonky because I was eating 50 grams of carbs, that was the main problem. I was eating like 50 grams of carbs, and I was nowhere near ketosis at 50 grams of carbs for me. And so then I was like, okay. And so I did some research. I studied. I read a couple books. And then so in May, I was like, okay, I think I understand this now. And so I dropped my carbs to 20 grams, and I, moderated a bunch of other stuff, and it just worked. Like it was, the first week I was a crazy person, but after that I was awesome.
Because you have to be quite strict with your level, don't you? I can remember talking to you about this before. You've experimented with things like broccoli, going over, because you use 20 total. And I know you've experimented before. Like, well, let's try and move closer to 20 net with things that should be fine, like broccoli. And you've thought maybe this is going to work, and it just doesn't for you.
Right. I mean, so I got a blood monitor pretty early on because I was like, because I had that little experience of it not quite working. I'm also super curious. And if there's a way to get more information, I want it. So I got a blood meter pretty quickly into the process and found that I was not hitting, that sort of 0.5 level of blood ketones that is, generally considered the start. Now, I know there's a lot of discussion around, athletes and various people who are using their ketones more rapidly, being, 0.3, 0.2 even. I was not an athlete. I was a very sedentary individual. So I was like, well, there should be some ketones hanging around in my blood. And so I had to look at, okay, what might be the cause of why my ketones are this low? And I found I was super sensitive to how many carbs I was eating, which is usually the reason that you're not in ketosis. And so when I first started, I had to sort of eat to the meter to make sure that I was there. And so when I first started, I had to be really careful with that. And so I went to total carbs, and within a couple of days of going to total carbs, I was at 0.5, 0.6, on a regularly in the morning, rarely below that, occasionally below it, but I was, I was in that range. And what has happened over time, which is interesting, is my carb tolerance has gone up, which people do often find. So at this point, I actually believe I could do net carbs. I've run a few experiments, 2 or 3 days of doing net carbs and kind of pushing the limit, at the upper end of the net carb scale. And I'm still in ketosis. Interestingly, also, when I first started keto, if I had too much protein, I was out of ketosis. And at this point, I can up my protein, remain in ketosis. But there's a line for both of those things still, where if I'm over it, I'm going to be out of ketosis. But a year and a half in, I am much more flexible in my carb and protein amount to still show blood ketones than I was for the first 6 to 8 months of keto.
And possibly a slight cumulative thing as well. So you might quite easily be able to have, say, 1 or 2 days where your protein, your carbs are a bit higher, and that's going to be okay. But perhaps if you continued that for a week or two, you might start seeing an impact.
Right. And I've thought about that. I agree with you. And I've thought about that. And one of the things that I've thought about is I don't actually want to do that. Not because I'm afraid of being out of ketosis. I don't fear that like I did at the beginning. At the beginning, you're like, oh my God, I'm not in ketosis. But now I'm like, whatever. I think it's a good double check that you're in the right range of eating and that you're your insulin is, probably in the right range, that you're not overly spiking it. You're not in the sea of insulin that you used to live in. But I make good food choices pretty much all the time now. And so it's not as much of a concern. I mostly test because, I like to experiment so that I can tell other people about what I've seen. And if I weren't doing that as much, I probably wouldn't be as concerned. But I digress. My original point was that I am happier, healthier, saner about food. I feel better when I tend to keep the carbs on the lower end. So what happens for me when I eat more carbs, keto carbs, but when I eat a lot more carbs, I get a little bit more cravey. My cravings are louder. My desire for snacking is louder. My thoughts about food come back. I start to experience a little bit more of what I would call my pre-keto food brain when I bump those carbs up very much. And so I'm great with like, hey, it's Thanksgiving, have some extra, keto stuffing and, don't worry about measuring. But I don't want it to be Thanksgiving every day.
I think that's a very good point. And I think what you say about really tuning in with how you feel is very important. So it's not just about those statistics, the data you're getting from your meter. You're not just going with that. You're not finding precisely what your boundaries are, but you're going with how you feel, how your mood is, how your cravings are. But it's nice to know that you can have the odd day like Thanksgiving or at Christmas or someone's birthday or something like that, where you can go a little bit higher than you're used to. You can, you've got the tolerance for that. But you found that your day to day is just that stricter level.
Yeah.
What does it look like, your day to day? What's an average day for you?
It's kind of shifted because I've been doing an experiment recently.
Oh,
I
tell
do
all.
them.
I know you do. You also try it with recipes, don't you? I saw on your Facebook group with the the cranberry jelly or something, and you tried it with all the different sweeteners.
I made 6 versions of cranberry this year because I tried every sweetener I had in my cabinet to see, like, I knew that xylitol made great cranberry. Yeah, this is like the sort of the Christmas or Thanksgiving cranberry that people serve often with turkey. I knew that it worked really well with xylitol, but I know now I can tolerate xylitol now, but when I was first keto, it would kick me out of ketosis like nobody's business. And I know that happens to a fair number of people. It does have more glycemic impact than other sweeteners like erythritol. And so there are a fair number of people that are somewhat xylitol intolerant.
Yeah, and I won't use it because of the dogs, so just don't have it in the house.
Exactly. And so I was like, well, what else would work as well as that? And so I ran through everything I had in my cabinet. And basically the only other 2 options that worked for me were pure monk fruit, which is just a very fine powder and you just need a teeny bit of it, or liquid stevia. Those did not get grainy. Everything with erythritol in it got grainy. Anyway, I digress. So how do I eat now? So yes, that's what I do all day, by the way. I make various weird things. I come up with recipes that are odd, very odd, but they work in the end some of the time. When I first started keto, I was pretty much eating about 60 grams of protein, about 130 grams of fat, and under 20 total grams of carbs. And that was pretty much, it would vary from 110 grams of fat to 150 grams of fat, but it was right in that kind of range. And that tended to look like, after my first month, I never really ate breakfast. My first month, there were eggs for breakfast, but past that point, it was really about a coffee with heavy cream in it mid-morning, a bunless burger for lunch, and maybe a big salad or a piece of meat with some veggies for dinner. And then often I would make some sort of keto treat that was very low carb. So I would do less with the almond flour, more with the with the cream cheese stuff, more of a pudding than although pudding means something different to you, doesn't it? But like a wet pudding.
Yeah, pudding to me is dessert, I think, is the equivalent.
Right.
Yeah.
What would you call, like a mousse?
A mousse, yeah.
Mousse-like things.
Mousse translates across the pond. Yeah.
I was like, wait, I have to do I had English nannies, so I tend to try to make sure I'm speaking appropriately to many cultures. But, so yeah, more like mousse type things than like cookies, because nuts, almond flour can have so many carbs. And so that was kind of what it looked like for a long time, cooking in a lot of butter, that kind of thing. Once I got past about 9-10 months, my fat just sort of naturally dropped again. Now, my first week, I probably ate like 300 grams of fat. I went nuts with fat my first week just to keep myself from eating carbs. I was like, if there's butter in your mouth, you can't put carbs in it. So and that strategy worked really well for me. I did drop weight. Yes, it was water weight, but I did. And then that need to overeat went away within 5 to 6 days. And so then, my sort of starting into my second year of keto, the fat has come down. But then starting about 2-3 months ago, I decided to look at my protein tolerance. So I started upping my protein to see where I hit a point at which I felt good about my protein consumption. Because I've been doing a lot of investigation into gluconeogenesis. Well, not a lot, some investigation. And I might have exaggerated with a lot. But some investigation into gluconeogenesis, and whether it's demand driven or it's not. If it's chain up or chain down.
The endless debate, yeah.
Exactly. How to start a fight in any keto group. And so I was like, and I really love Amber O'Hearn, and I think she's so smart. Like, you just want to listen to her talk all the time. And I decided to listen to her because she does think it's more demand driven. And, I do think our primitive brains have so much trouble with holding two ideas at once, right? It's black or it's white. It's yes or it's no. It's this or it's that. And so it's complex is what the reality is. And so I do think that super metabolically damaged people, because protein is insulinogenic, and I have no doubts about that. I think too much protein is definitely an issue for them. But over the course of being keto, my fasting insulin levels have dropped significantly. I'm not yet at the optimal level, but I'm at a much healthier range. So I was like, I wonder if I can tolerate higher amounts of protein. That's kind of what the thought process that spurred it. And they don't necessarily they're not like a 1-to-1 relationship with those things either, but I started thinking about it. And so I bumped up my protein quite a bit. And for a few days, I was very high. And I was like, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel good. I gained 5 pounds. I, was not anywhere near ketosis. I was like, okay. And I was at 125 grams at that point. I doubled it. And I was like, okay, let's scale that back a bit. And so I went to about 80 grams, which for me, I'm a big believer that you base your protein amount on your lean body mass, because I don't really care to feed my fat cells very much. And so, I don't necessarily think anything that bases it on your current body weight is an appropriate way to scale. But some people do ideal body weight, aka reference weight. Some people do lean body mass. I've actually done a chart. I'm a big spreadsheeter where I've aligned these things and found out that a lot of experts are actually talking about the same amount of protein if you're talking about sort of, what ideal body weight might be. So I did a cross-reference chart, and I looked at all the experts and what they recommend. So I feel pretty comfortable at this point, where I was about 0.6 grams. I'm now about 0.8 grams per pound of lean body mass. That feels like a pretty comfortable range for me. And so I've been doing that, and I dropped my fat a bit along with that, because one goes up, the other comes down. You're going to play with things like that. And it's been different. I feel different. I think a little different. I've been riding the edge a bit more of diet mentality. And that's been a bit more of a struggle mentally, because I still have weight that I did lose quite a bit of weight, going keto, but the weight loss has slowed. It hasn't stopped, but it's slowed. And I'm getting to a point where I was like, oh, maybe, when you make a change, you're like, maybe I'll jumpstart this. I gave up dairy, and I was like, people are like, oh, you'll lose 10 pounds. That did not happen. I was like, please stop telling me these things, people, because it gets my hopes up. But I've been playing with it to see, because if I'm not willing to test my theories on myself, what good am I?
No, absolutely. So when you were saying that you've upped your protein and you've brought your fat down a bit, was that planned, or was it just a natural reaction because you were eating more of one, you were less hungry for the other, or did you plan it out?
I am a horrible experimenter in this one way, which is, they say just change one thing at a time. Just change one thing at a time. Well, but I'm always like, well, I'm making a change. I might as well try everything. And so, there are a lot of keto camps that talk about more protein, less fat. And so I was like, well, let's see if it works. Let's see what happens. So it wasn't 100% natural. There was a thought involved in it. But it was also possible because I couldn't really lower my fat considerably more than I had it, before when I was eating less protein because I was just going to be, I wasn't eating to a number. I was eating to hunger. And so I am unwilling to be starving all the time. I would rather never lose a single pound than spend my life on a diet, or what, feels like a diet and feel like a crazy hungry person. But I was like, well, but if I could lose a few more pounds, that'd be lovely. And so so it was a combination.
And how do you feel with the new regime? Do you feel like you felt before, or how do you feel different in your body? Or
I feel a little more, this is a complicated question. I feel physically good. And I can feel some of the mental stuff cropping up now and again because I have just spent the first year and a half of my life not on a diet since I started keto. Keto never felt like a diet. Except the first week. And now I sort of feel a little bit like I'm on a diet. And so that part feels harder because there is a little bit more of the part of my brain turned on that's like, oh, but if you eat that, you're going to go over what you kind of planned on eating today. And so there's this part of me that I don't know if I like it. I don't know. But I said I would commit to this experiment and I'm committed to it. And it's not that hard. I mean, I suspect I feel less like I'm dieting than 90% of the women in the world at this point. But it's more present than it was when my macros were basically, restrict your protein, eat as much fat as you want. Whereas now it's sort of, that's turned on its head. I still do eat more fat than protein often, but sometimes I don't. And because I want to see what that feels like and what happens. I will say the weight has not fallen off I have not shed it like the skin of a snake. So, the question of whether it's worth it or not is a good one. But again, if I'm not willing to experiment, I'm not doing the work I'm meant to do. And
do you have a planned length of time for how long you're going to do this, or until you see a certain change, or what's the plan?
What I've come to realize in this experiment is I think that I probably will not drop the protein again. I like this amount of protein. I'm in ketosis. I feel good. I enjoy meat a lot. And so it's nice to have a little more flexibility. I'm not going to go back up to the 120, anytime soon. But I feel great at the level I'm currently at. And in hindsight, I don't know that I would have felt great a year ago at this level. But I think that's the important note about keto is neither one size fits all, nor an eternity fits one. You have to be willing to roll with it, change it up, try different things, because what worked for you last year, you're a different person this year, in a lot of ways. And you have to be willing to make those changes. I tend to do things in sort of 90-day sprints when I try things, out. So if, which I'm actually pretty close to. At that point, if the weight hasn't come down, I probably will go back a bit to, just listening to my hunger about how much fat I eat. But I'm also in that period looking at right now, I just hired on with, Nourish, Balance, Thrive. Have you heard of them? Tommy Woods and Christopher Kelly. They're a sort of a health consortium online, and they do a bunch of testing and a bunch of stool testing and a bunch of pee test. You're doing all sorts of metabolic things.
Testing all the things that come out of you. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like full excretion testing all the time. Because I have hypothyroidism, I have PCOS, I have a bunch of health concerns. And I found out that my metabolic rate is really wonky. And so, maybe looking at like keto is the best I can do for my food. And then on top of that, what other things do I need to be looking at that might be broken or slightly bent in my system? Because most of the time I find when you're doing all the right things with food, you can get crazy over, is it 90 grams of fat or 100 grams of fat? I mean, it's one friggin' tablespoon of butter is what it is. Like, it makes you nuts. But then you actually take a step back and you're like, oh, you have sleep apnea. You're not sleeping well. You are super stressed out. Your job is killing you. Food is actually only one of the probably 4 pillars of good health. And if you're totally out of whack in other areas, your body's going to hold on to some excess weight.
Yeah, regardless of what you do. However, people always focus. It's always, what am I doing wrong with what I'm eating? Because they always think that.
Yeah. And it's not the whole story.
No, not at all. It's very interesting what you were saying, though, about your mental state with lowering the fat, and how what strikes me with what you were saying about the thoughts that were starting to come back into your head, that potentially that set of macros is something that would be difficult to maintain long term. With me anyway, if I feel like I'm being too restrictive, I can flip right over to the other side and just go nuts.
Right. Because, I will honestly tell you that the first year and a half on keto, I never had any thoughts about cheating. I thought about cheating like as a concept because people would ask me about it, but it wasn't on my radar at all to eat anything not keto. I wasn't the least bit tempted when I was, buying my niece and nephew ice cream. I wasn't the least bit tempted sitting at I was a little tempted when French fries were involved, but it wouldn't occur to me to eat one. It was just not part of my identity. I think I felt like a vegetarian feels at a meat dinner. Like, it just wasn't something I was going to put in my mouth. But since I've lowered the fat, those thoughts are much louder. The thoughts of, maybe that wouldn't be so bad. I could maybe have, and I haven't, but the thoughts are there and I don't like that. So, when I'm talking to people about being keto, I am a big advocate of starting with it very high fat, where you lean heavier on the fat to change your behaviors, to change your thought patterns. I think that's the winning strategy for new people. I couldn't have made this change before now. Whether this change turns out to be a good thing or not, the jury is still out. I am glad I'm doing it. I am super glad I'm doing it. I'm learning a lot. I'm also really learning where I was simply eating fat out of habit versus hunger. And so I think if I hadn't done this experiment, that wouldn't have been so clear either.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you're testing your satiety signals with the different macros, with fat and with protein, and how that's getting affected as you change the levels.
Yeah, totally. And so I think it's an awesome thing to look at. And I do think that if sort of long term, if I do adjust my fat back up a bit, it's probably not going to be where it was my first year, for the most part, because I find I'm super satisfied with a much lower level at this point.
It sounds like it would be interesting to increase it in small increments until those thoughts that you've started having go away again, and see where that sweet spot is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is keto. This is what long-term successful keto people do, is they play with it. How does this work? How does that work?
Carry on tweaking it as you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's something written on your Twitter page, I believe it is, and you say, Keto Martha Stewart for your life. If Martha's mom was from the Bronx, her dad from Arkansas, and she spent a decade in a sex cult. Now,
yeah.
Sex cult.
Yeah.
You've got to tell me more about that.
You're not interested in my mom from the Bronx? Come on. So yeah, I will say that, on my journey of self-discovery, I reached a point in my late 20s, early 30s where I was like, all right, Kim, you're just going to be fat. Like, you're going to be fat. You've been fat your whole adult life. You should really learn to love yourself as you are. And I found an organization that taught about sexuality. And I've always been a really open, liberal, socially liberal, person about a lot of these things. I grew up in the Bay Area in California. These things weren't foreign to me as concepts. And so I kind of became part of this community of people teaching about a practice called orgasmic meditation, which is an awesome practice. It's actually in the 4-hour body. It's a super incredible technique for stress relief. It helps women who are inorgasmic. It helps them kind of reclaim their sexuality if they feel like that's a need, which it often is. It helps men feel more skilled, more connected. Like, it has a lot to recommend it.
I was going to say, it sounds like it's got a fair amount going for it.
It's got a lot going for it, which is why it's so attractive. And then I ended up working for the organization, teaching it, coaching it. I said, I taught about it for a long time. I really believe in it as a concept, and I believe in a lot of the things that I was teaching. And at the same time, I use the word sex cult somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but, the reality was I eventually developed a fairly difficult relationship with the community that I was within. And it became, you can look at a lot of companies or experiences sort of like, people call working for Apple a cult, or working for, various startups. You're working 24/7. You're trying to grow the business. You're never off. You're getting texts constantly. It became actually a really stressful work environment, which is kind of funny given what we were teaching about. And for me, I basically had a nervous breakdown at some point and had to leave and put my life back together. And I had spent a good deal of time at that point invested in this thing. And so you have to, at that point, whatever it is, if you devote yourself to something and it ends, and for me, it had to end. My relationship with this work environment had to end. You don't want to necessarily leave everything you learned behind because you need to move your life. And for a while I was like, okay, I'll keep teaching about this general topic. And then I was like, oh no, okay, so I read a book at that point also that I found out about from Tim Ferriss, who apparently is my guru at this point, called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And the reality was, I had spent a lot of time teaching about sexuality at this point, and but I'd never had much of an obstacle in that arena, right? It wasn't hard for me to talk about. It wasn't hard for me to teach about. What my obstacle was food. What was standing in my way was food. And I sort of went on this tangent of teaching about sexuality because it was sort of a taboo area where I could get a lot of self-confidence, but I was actually still sidestepping the actual issue in my life, which is funny. Most people are like, "Oi, that's pretty far out there to go on the unacceptable to most of society reference range." And you are more comfortable talking about that as a topic than talking about eating. But, it's what feels off in your life.
I was going to say, it's relative, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is relative. And then, I sort of got a hold of myself and I was like, Kim, you can't just do things because they look good. You have to do things that make an impact on the world. And I do think a lot of the world needs help with their sexuality. And there is a big impact to be had in that arena. But my particular gift is in my struggle, right? If I share my struggle, I can bring more freedom to more people than if I share something that's not really a struggle. If I talk about things that weren't really my thing. And so The Obstacle is the Way, right? Ryan Holiday's book. It's amazing. I recommend everyone read it. I probably am the only person that was crying reading a book about stoicism. But I really felt like, okay, if I can share my struggle, share my story, share what I've learned, because I'm an insatiably curious person. I don't, like earlier I said, I don't want to just know that I can't eat a nectarine. I want to know why I can't eat a nectarine. And then I can share that knowledge with other people and hopefully change their lives too by being the one willing to go first.
Well, it sounds to me like the time you spent with that coaching, it's certainly not wasted, because what you've been able to do is add that skill that you learnt there to your experience, combine it all into something that you really do want to be teaching about and sharing, and doing what you do now. Why don't you tell us about that? Because you've been how long now with your completely keto group, but it's been going for a while now, hasn't it?
Yeah. So I run, I'm the co-founder with Harlan of a group called Completely Keto. And and I've known Harlan for years, Harlan Kilstein. He's awesome. We've known each other for a long time, but he saw my success on keto. He's like, I got to get on this thing. We both have to keto. So we worked together on getting him keto for a while. And then he's like, let's talk about this in the world. And so, Completely Keto started. And from there, it just took off. People want to know about keto. It's a Facebook group, and we are now at, well over 100K in members. Depending on when you listen to this, I don't want to give an exact number because it will be higher. And it's a very active group. I'm on there pretty much all day and night, answering questions. I do live Q&As twice a week so that if people they want, the questions answered. I don't want people to feel like there's a barrier to entry for information. I also do coaching, and I do group coaching where if somebody wants more attention and, time with me and lessons and like more concentrated effort, there's that option too. But I also want to make sure this information, this help, this knowledge is accessible to everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's the key with coaching. All you're actually doing is offering an extra service that's on top of all the other things that are there for people to find out about for themselves. But if they need a bit more help or don't want to do all the research themselves, then it's just another level that they can go to.
Right. I mean, quite honestly, this is sort of the way I look at it. Maybe cold heart, I don't know, is like, hey, here's how you figure out your macros. Go for it, right? That's free. Do it. Have at. But then if you're like, can you figure my macros out for me? I'll be like, would you like to hire the service? Because, and granted, I mean, that's just a general example. I certainly have helped people with that for absolutely no cost. But, the idea for me is, and this was sort of the teach a man to fish thing, which is when I first started keto, I was like, okay, I'm going to make this my life's work in a way. I'm going to spend all my free time doing it. I'm going to listen to every podcast I can. I'm going to read every book I can. I'm going to dive really deep because this is important and I want to know more. And I love that avenue is available for everyone. And then there are other things where you want a shortcut. You want help. You don't want to spend the time. You want somebody else to help you, or you're just like, I need more emotional support and I want somebody on call to be that. So there can be a lot of different reasons somebody wants a coach versus a teacher, if you will. And so I want all those options to be available for everyone because, if somebody tells me I'm a busy mom, I work a corporate gig, I have no free time. Can you please distill this information down so I just know what I need to know? Yes, I can provide that for you. I don't earn a lot of money. I need to do this for my health. I have some extra time, but I don't can't afford XYZ program. Great. Here are all these amazing resources. So, I want everyone to succeed, and whatever I need to offer to make that successful, I will find it and I will do it because, at the end of the day, I think keto is changing lives. It's changing our world. Like, I am deeply invested in keto being a part of everyone's life who needs it, and it's really important to me.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I can hear the passion coming through. So what's next? Any more big plans? Any changes, or just?
I'm always tinkering. So I don't have a next experiment on the horizon. It'll probably show its face after the holidays. It's kind of we're heading into that. I am Jewish, and my mom is Jewish, my dad is Christian. But my mother loves Christmas. And so we do Christmas up big, as only a Jew can, as I say. Giant tree, lots of packages. And so this time of year is a big family time. So there'll be a lot of that going on. And also I'm working with a coaching group. So I run coaching groups. And they're heading into the holiday season as well. Oh, I guess we're already in it, at this time, and so supporting them through the season is also really important to me. And then getting geared up for January, where everyone will most likely suddenly decide that they need to actually buckle down and get serious, because January, for whatever reason, for me it's September. I still have the association with school starting, but a lot of people have that New Year's resolution thing. So I suspect we'll have a lot of new members and people that need a lot of help.
Absolutely. It's the real traditional time, isn't it? Everyone joins the gym, goes on a diet, starts a new plan. January the 1st, January 2nd. That's it. We're changing.
Yep, exactly. And so, I'm getting geared up to make sure I have new food plans, because, I make food plans for people, food lists, all that kind of stuff. I'm sort of spending this month making sure we have, all the options available. And
just, gearing up for Christmas and all the parties and the festive time of year.
It is a festive time of year. I'm very fond of it.
Yeah, this is actually, it's the first time I've been looking forward to Christmas for a while, actually, because I'm going back to the UK to spend it with my family.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and I've got a niece and nephews now, so it's fabulous. Christmas is about the kids, isn't it? And so I'm really, really looking forward to it.
It really is. I've got 3.
Seeing it through their eyes, that it just takes you back to that overwhelming excitement about Christmas and waking up on Christmas morning and just the thrill of it. So I can't wait to see it through their eyes.
It really is special, I think. I remember, I always remember growing up that, my grandparents would be in town and they'd get my room. And so I'd have to sleep in my brother's room. And then, Christmas morning, we'd wake each other up and go down. And I would just remember my poor parents looking so bleary because they'd been up all night building toys.
Yeah, that's it. I can remember my mum saying to me, "No, you go back to bed. You are not allowed to get up until," I think it was still something quite early, like 6 a.m.
Like, it is still dark out, Daisy. Back in bed.
Oh, well, it's been fantastic talking to you today, Kim. Perhaps we could round up with your top.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, your top tip for the listeners.
Oh, top tip. This is more of a touchy-feely top tip, which is, I would say that you have to listen to your body. You have to. It is essential. Any approach to eating that leaves your body behind is not a good approach. If you're white knuckling it, if it feels impossible, if you're starving, if you're unhappy, if you're obsessed with food, if any of the kinds of things that are happening mentally to you don't feel good, something needs to be adjusted. Listen to your body. When people say you have to drink double your weight in water, and then you're like, I'm doing that and I feel like I'm going to pass out all the time. It's like, yeah, you're drinking so much water, you're flushing out your electrolytes. Listen to your body. Now, that does not mean listen to your addict, because your addict, granted, not all of you are addicts. I'm speaking to the addicts in the room. Your addict will tell you things, but it's not always true. So your addict might say, you need this, you need that. Just one won't hurt you. Don't listen to that voice. But how do you feel is important. Do you feel good? Because you should feel good. It is your right to feel good. It is right that you should feel good. And maybe some things will need to be addressed before you feel good. But you want to be moving on the path that you can spend the rest of your life feeling as good as your body can possibly feel.
Yeah, that's great. That's a fantastic strategy. And I think so often, probably because people have been on and off diets and are just so used to blaming themselves, the first thing they do if things aren't working, if they're not feeling good, is to blame themselves and to say, well, I've got to change something. It must be me that's doing something wrong. Where actually, quite possibly, they need to tweak what they're doing with keto. They need to adapt. Keto needs to adapt to suit them rather than the other way around.
Right. And, it's so easy. And this happens, Facebook groups are not known for their subtlety. So, if you're talking to 10,000, 100,000, 150,000 people at a time, you tend to speak in absolutes. But I try to also point out that, just because it works for most people this way doesn't mean it works for everyone that way. And so it's important that you pay attention to yourself. You are the best gauge of how it's working. The N equals 1, the experiment that you are trumps everything else.
Absolutely. I think any plan, like you say, when you have to talk in general terms to a certain extent when you're talking to so many people. And it's good that you give a plan to start with. This is how you start. Stick to this to start with, get you going, and then start tweaking it according to you. Like you say, listen to your body and start making the changes that work for you.
Totally.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Kim. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. I was so happy to do this. I think it's a fabulous project, and you've had some amazing women on the show, so I'm very honored to be part of that.
Yeah, my latest extraordinary woman. Thank you. To get the resources and links from the show, please go to ketowomenpodcast.com. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you want to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomenpodcast.com. If you fancy joining me on this exciting adventure and help create new shows, please go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/ketowoman, where you can make a monthly contribution, big or small. You can also simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman website. It's thanks to the two keto dudes that I'm hosting this podcast, so please consider heading to their Patreon page at patreon.2keto.com and help them bring you more podcasts like this one. Please help other people find this podcast by subscribing to and reviewing it on iTunes. It's my birthday today, and I thought I would take a moment to reflect back on and share with you what has been a pretty incredible year. It was September of 2016, and I was feeling pretty low. I'd fallen off the low-carb, high-fat wagon pretty hard and regained 15 kilos in just a few months after hitting my target weight in May. A good friend of mine, Kirsten, told me about a Facebook group that I needed to join because it was pretty great, and it was just what I needed to help me get back on track. It was called the Two Keto Dudes. It wasn't long before Richard asked me to be an admin, and I was thrilled to be part of a group of people who were so smart and kind. And keto, well, it was a revelation. The migraines and depression that had plagued me for decades started to reduce dramatically, and that pesky weight regain soon started melting away too. When the dudes moved to the forum, I decided to start a Facebook keto group for women called Kick-Ass Keto Bitches. And let me tell you, this group of women are amazing. I would never have believed what incredible bonds could be established around the globe. KKB has become my safe place, and these women are my tribe. It was them who gave me the confidence to be able to take on this podcast and ramble on at you through the web waves. I will be forever grateful to them and to Richard Morris and Carl Franklin, aka the two super cool keto dudes, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. This week's quote is from J.M. Barrie and is unapologetically whimsical. Dreams do come true if we only wish hard enough. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.